Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are looking at the grand finals of the Toronto Regionals Regulation H format from last year. This is Marco Silva versus Wolfe Glick, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at it. This is a rematch. These players did play earlier in the tournament. Wolfe Glick did come away with the victory here, but this is one of those things where Marco Silva has probably been able to get a little bit of prep time with this team here. Ursaluna, Jump Left, Charizard, Torkoal, Incineroar, and Porygon 2. Ursaluna here is Terra Ghost with the Flame Orb and Guts, boosting its attack stat, not getting that neg from the burn. Headlong Rush, Facade, Earthquake, and Protect. Jumpluff here with the Covert Cloak, Terra Water, and Chlorophyll to take advantage of the sun that Torkoal sets, Sleep Powder, Sunny Day, Tailwind, and Rage Powder. Charizard with the Terra Ghost, Choice Spec, Solar Power, again, still centered around that Torkoal, Air Slash, Heat Wave, Overheat, and Weather Ball. And then finally, of course, well, not finally, but Torkoal here with that Terra Fire Drought, Helping Hand, Eruption, Overheat, Protect, and Eject pack, so that when Overheat gives it a -2, it can go ahead and swap on out, or if it gets hit by an Intimidate, those stat drops will swap it out for the Eject pack. The Incineroar here with the Terra Ghost, Citrus Berry, Intimidate, Fake Out, Flare Blitz, Knockoff, Parting Shot. This is the most standard Incineroar set that you'll ever see in your life. Porygon 2 with the Terra Fighting. This is a super interesting one. Eviolite, Download, Terra Blast, Ice Beam, Recover, and Trick Room. The Terra Fighting Terra Blast on this Porygon 2 is actually something we've seen a couple times from Marco Silva in this tournament that has been pretty effective here. So for the most part, some pretty standard stuff on the common Pokemon for Marco, but some curveballs that Wolfe will have to deal with. Now, speaking of curveballs here, Archaludon, Kingdra, Politoed, Incineroar, Gothitelle, and Amoonguss here. Archaludon is Power Herb, not Assault Vest, but Power Herb Electro Shot, so that it can get that Electro Shot special attack boost in one turn, even with the rain. Protect, Flash Cannon, and Dragon Pulse, and Sturdy here, notably not Stamina. Kingdra with that Terra Stellar Life Orb, Swift Swim to take advantage of Politoed's Rain, Protect, Draco Meteor, Weather Ball, and Muddy Water. Politoed here, the opposing weather setter to the Torkoal with the Terra Grass Leftovers, Drizzle to set the rain, Protect, Weather Ball, Perish Song, and Encore. Incineroar, quite standard, but a little bit different with the Safety Goggles, Intimidate, Fake Out, Knockoff, Parting Shot, and Protect here instead of Flare Blitz, and again, that Terra Ghost. Gothitelle here, one of Wolfe's all-time classic Pokemon. Terra Dark, Citrus Berry, Shadow Tag, Protect, Psychic, Fake Out, and Trick Room, and then Amoonguss to round things out with the Terra Fairy Eject button, Regenerator, Protect, Rage Powder, Spore, and Pollen Puff. Politoed and Gothitelle here work in concert together with that Perish Song and Shadow Tag to keep your opponent's Pokemon locked onto the battlefield while Perish Song ticks down and locks them out. In the previous matchup, Marco Silva took a little bit of a gamble, tried to anticipate that Wolfe wouldn't be leading with Gothitelle or wouldn't be going for a Perish Song play, and led with essentially Jumpluff and Porygon 2 lead, and that just ended up being a massive detriment. I know that is something that Marco is going to want to avoid coming into this, either as in a way to potentially make a call, but try to be bold enough and make calls in such a way that Wolfe is not able to go for Perish Song. I think that is something that Marco wants back. So coming into this, we have Gothitelle and Kingdra for Wolfe, and Marco leading with Jumpluff and Incineroar. So this is I don't know that we saw this lead from Marco previously, but Incineroar being on the field does apply a lot of pressure onto this Gothitelle, and it means that Wolfe isn't necessarily going to be able to go for that Perish Trap all that early. Incineroar with that Parting Shot can swap out, Knockoff can do a fair amount of damage. The main thing for Wolfe, though, is that you can swap in a potential Politoed here. You would have to potentially worry about Gothitelle's Sunny Day overriding that, but that would put Kingdra incredibly fast, and that would mean a lot of damage coming out quickly. Instead, Wolfe swaps out the Gothitelle and brings in an Incineroar of his own. Intimidate coming through, that's going to put Marco's Incineroar down at -1. Knockoff could still be pretty effective here, but I don't know if it's going to do all that much. Jumpluff does go for the Tailwind here, giving Marco the speed advantage off the bat. Knockoff comes through from Marco's Incineroar, knocking off Kingdra's Life Orb, doing quite a bit of damage at the same time. Draco Meteor comes through. How much will this do to the Jumpluff? Not nearly enough. I don't even know if Life Orb would have been enough to take it out from there either. So for Wolfe, Incineroar does still have Safety Goggles. Notably, the Kingdra doesn't. So it is potentially gonna, could potentially get put to sleep here with the Sleep Powder. But for Wolfe, you do still have access to Fake Out. That won't stop Jumpluff from moving. It could do some additional damage. You could potentially stop Marco's Incineroar from moving. And Kingdra, the main thing it wants to try to do now is probably try to reset, swap out. Right now, at -2 special attack with no Life Orb, it's really not going to be doing very much damage at all. But no, Wolfe stays in with it. Marco does go for the Sleep Powder on the Kingdra. I think that's a fair shout if you are Wolfe, anticipating that Kingdra is going to stay in. Parting Shot does come through from Marco's Incineroar, looking like the faster of the two Incins. Again, I don't remember if we actually saw Incin versus Incin on the battlefield at the same time in the previous matchup. So players probably were aware of this, but this is good for us to see outright. Now, we do get to see a little bit of the rest of Marco's team here. It is Ursaluna and Porygon 2, and Ursaluna is going to be the one to make it out onto the battlefield here. Kingdra is fast asleep. Now, if Wolf does not have a knockoff onto this Ursaluna, it is knockoff onto the Ursaluna, so no guts, no flame or trigger for Marco on this turn. That is pretty big. Ursaluna still hits hard. It's still a very, very strong Pokemon that can do a lot of damage, but without that Flame Orb proccing guts and just shooting its attack stat into the stratosphere, it's going to be doing far less in this matchup. Now, Kingdra has already had one turn of guaranteed sleep. It could be waking up here. It could be waking up on a future turn. Incineroar doesn't really want to take a Headlong Rush or an Earthquake from this Ursaluna, and right now Marco is not in a terrible spot to just click Earthquake. Jumpluff could stay on the field, but all things considered, Headlong Rush would work just as well into the Incineroar to make sure that it goes down on this turn. We do see Jumpluff swap out for Marco here, so pretty good reason to not go for the Earthquake, and Porygon 2 makes its way out onto the battlefield. Tailwind going to be going down relatively soon, so with Porygon 2 on the battlefield, that'll give Marco the opportunity to set up Trick Room here in a bit. We see the Terastallization coming through from Marco. It is going to be that Ursaluna going into Terra Ghost. So that does make sure that it removes any water type weaknesses from this Kingdra should Kingdra wake up. But it does make itself a little bit more prone to if Wolf's Incineroar goes for another knockoff into that slot. We do see a Terastallization from Wolf, though, as well, going into a Terra Ghost of his own, so eliminating Incineroar's own ground type weakness at the same time. So both players going for that Ghost Terra, and I'm interested to see how much damage comes through from this Headlong Rush. Not enough to take out the Incin, and that does drop Ursaluna's defense and special defense. Where are we going to see Incineroar go for here? Kingdra does wake up. Draco Meteor comes through. It is at -2. It's going to do a little bit of damage to the Porygon 2, but not very much at all. It's some chip, I guess, and Parting Shot comes out into the Ursaluna. So that is going to be an attack drop, and Incineroar is going to get to swap out into either Gothitelle or Pokemon number 4. Politoed would make sense. That it gives Wolf both a Parasong option and gives Kingdra a little bit of a boost. It is just going to be that Gothitelle making its way onto the battlefield. Now, Gothitelle does have the ability to go for Fake Out into Porygon 2. It can't do as much into the Ursaluna. Kingdra being on the battlefield, it still just does not have very much damage. This is a pretty good turn for Wolf, I think, to swap out the Kingdra for Incineroar again, get another minus on to Ursaluna's attack stat, reset Kingdra's stat drops, and Gothitelle gets to stay on the field and get some work done either with Psychics or, again, a potentially Fake Out into Porygon 2 here. Wolf, I think you have to swap out Kingdra if you are Wolf. If you are Marco, that's a pretty clear call. You can make that call that Kingdra, like, either Kingdra's not going to do much of anything this turn, or it's going to swap out. You can go for a pretty safe Headlong Rush into that slot. I believe if you are Marco, you are going to get another -1 onto your Ursaluna, so you're going to be at -2. Actually, it's Politoed that makes its way onto the battlefield for Wolf here, not the Incineroar. Drizzle comes in, Rain is active, Headlong Rush comes through. Politoed is incredibly tanky, but even at -1, still takes a lot of damage from that Headlong Rush. So Gothitelle does get to go for Psychic here. There's going to be some good damage into the Ursaluna, especially with the defense drops, but no, just taking it down to 57 HP, and Trick Room comes out onto the battlefield for Marco Silva here. So Wolf has the Perish Trap duo on the field, but this is one of the scariest things about Wolf's team, is that Wolf does not need to go for Perish Song right now, because not only is Ursaluna getting quite low, Porygon 2 isn't going to be able to take too many hits from these Pokemon that Wolf has on the field. So it is not unlikely that Wolf just goes for some aggressive options, just goes for some attacking options here. If you are Marco, you can't swap, or you can swap out your Ursaluna, as it is a ghost type right now. And again, ghosts are immune to Shadow Tag. They can swap out as much as they want, but ultimately that would leave you with one of your other important Pokemon on the battlefield to eventually get knocked out and cannot support Ursaluna as much. Terra Blast comes through from the Porygon 2 into the Politoed, does a significant amount of damage, taking it down to about a quarter of its HP, and Perish Song does come out onto the field. So Gothitelle still here, didn't get a Psychic into the Ursaluna. That would have been some additional damage. Again, Wolf probably would have been in a decent spot to KO the Ursaluna outright, but this at least puts a ticking time clock on the Porygon 2 of all things. Again, it has some decent damage, not a ton, and Perish Song should be a guaranteed way for it to go down. If you are Wolf, you're not too worried about taking out this Ursaluna with Perish Song, I think. Alternatively, Wolf could have been anticipating a switch here from the Ursaluna, but now if you are Marco, you can swap the Ursaluna out, bring in Incineroar potentially, and then you have some additional pressure both onto the Gothitelle and even onto the Politoed with knockoff, as those leftovers are not going to feel all that great. So for Marco, you still have some good damage right now. Wolf can still swap out either of his Pokemon. I don't think you are going to see Gothitelle with Gothitelle swapping out quite yet. I think that would honestly be on the next turn, but Jumpluff makes its way on to the battlefield now, and Wolf does swap out that Politoed. I believe we're going to see Incineroar making its way back out onto the battlefield. That is going to be an Intimidate down onto both these Pokemon, but it shouldn't matter all that much. Now, Incineroar is rather low. Notably, Porygon 2 cannot touch Incineroar at this stage in the game, which is pretty big. We do see Psychic come through from the Gothitelle into the Jumpluff. Does not do enough damage to take it out. That is pretty relevant. Terra Blast comes through from the Porygon 2 into the Gothitelle, not doing all that much, maybe a fifth of its HP. That's going to take quite a while for that to trigger. So Gothitelle down, so all, the perished Pokemon down to 2 on the perished song. Right now, Wolf can go for, so this is a spot where Wolf can guarantee a KO on the Porygon 2. Wolf can go for Protect on both Pokemon here, and then swap out the Gothitelle for Politoed, as well as go for a Parting Shot on the Incin to bring the Gothitelle back in on the next turn. Jumpluff should be more than fine to survive. We do see the Fake Out come through into the Porygon 2. This is another way to guarantee that neither Pokemon survives the turn, with the Fake Out into the Porygon 2 and then another Psychic into the Jumpluff here, not even having to risk that double Protect. So Psychic comes out, Jumpluff goes down. So this is going to be 2 KOs for Wolf in this turn, with both of his remaining Pokemon still feeling relatively okay and having some good aggression in the back still, with Politoed and Porygon 2, or Politoed and Kingdra rather, as this Porygon 2 is about to fall. For Marco, Incineroar makes its way back out onto the battlefield. It is still at full health, and it does have that Citrus Berry, so it's going to be rather tanky. It's not going to be the easiest thing to put down, but for Wolf, you can go for a Protect on the Incineroar. You can swap out the Gothitelle. You could swap the Gothitelle into Politoed, go for Parting Shot on the Incineroar, although it is a little bit risky if you go for Parting Shot right now. So if you're Wolf, I think we're definitely just going to see a potential swap out on the Gothitelle and a Protect from the Incineroar. I doubt we are going to see Gothitelle sacrifice itself here. I think that would be a pretty big risk. Incineroar does go for the Protect, so we do not see a swap out here notably. Actually, okay, so Gothitelle is going to swap itself out. This isn't the worst thing in the world if you are Wolf. We do see Psychic go into the Porygon 2 notably. Terra Blast comes through into the Gothitelle. They're trading damage out. Okay, so Gothitelle is going to sacrifice itself here. That is what we're seeing. That does mean Wolf will still have a Pokemon lead, and Marco will be down to just 2 Pokemon. That does give Wolf the ability to just bring Politoed in and go for another Perish Song, especially with rain dropping right now, and that means that Wolf does not need to have Shadow Tag active notably. That is probably pretty relevant. Gothitelle does not do a lot of work into Incineroar. It doesn't really do any work at all, and Ursaluna is already relatively low. So Trick Room fades. We are going to see Ursaluna make its way back out onto the battlefield here. I think a big thing for Wolf to note, his Incineroar is the slower of the 2. We could see Kingdra make its way back out on the battlefield now. Yeah. That's exactly what we see. And this is where Wolf could get aggressive. We could see, so if we see a Politoed swap in here, we could very well see a Weather Ball from the Kingdra into either of these slots. I don't know how much damage it's going to be able to do into Incineroar. Wolf down to just these 3 Pokemon here. Politoed honestly is a relatively bulky Pokemon, and the question is, how much would it be able to do into Incineroar if it comes down to essentially a Politoed versus Incineroar game plan towards the end of this game? Rain does come through. This will activate Swift Swim from Kingdra, doubling its speed and making Weather Ball a water type stab move. Ursaluna does go down. This leaves Marco's Incineroar alone versus 3 of Wolf's Pokemon. They all do have some damage on them, but I don't know that this Incineroar is going to have enough juice in the tank to be able to make it work. Knockoff on the Kingdra takes it down into the yellow HP, down to about a 4th. Politoed is still feeling pretty fine here, and this Leftovers recovery is going to be a long-term problem for Marco, and I think this is just going to be it, with Kingdra being able to fire off a Weather Ball as well as the Politoed here, and that should lock things up for game number 1 for Wolfe Glick. So only 1 KO with the Perish Song there, but it applied enough pressure, and honestly, I didn't quite see the line, but a relatively smart Gothitelle sacrifice that allowed Wolf to very safely bring in Kingdra and set up the rest of the game to be some pretty clean KOs with said Kingdra. So for Marco, Oh man, this is a hard game, I feel like, to make adjustments for. You don't play against a ton of Perish Song, right? Like, it's not something that you have had a ton of practice against. You know Wolfe has brought it, so it's something you have in your mind. Incineroar and Terra Ghost Ursaluna feel like pretty good ways to maneuver around it, but I think Marco really does value the speed control highly with Porygon 2 and Jump Love. So how do you balance those things while still being able to be aggressive enough to take KOs? I think the biggest thing for Marco is making sure that Ursaluna is not going to get hit by a knockoff. I think if Guts was able to trigger, that would have been a very, very good way for Ursaluna to just sweep the rest of the game. But with that Flame Roar getting knocked off, that gave Wolfe a very clean opening into the rest of the game. So coming in to game number 2 here, I'm interested to see what adjustments are made, and Wolfe changes it up big time. Incineroar and Kingdra versus Marco's Incineroar and Jumpluff. So both players leading Incineroar on the battlefield this time around. Marco still with that Jumpluff, and Wolfe still with that Kingdra. So fake outs are live for both players. Jumpluff does not get hit by Covert Cloak does not care about it with Covert Cloak at all. This does mean Wolfe probably does not want to go for fake out. Marco's Incineroar is the faster of the two. You can guarantee at least that Marco's Incineroar doesn't go for something like a knockoff. If you are Wolfe, you could go for fake out into that slot or guarantee a terrestrialization. Either way, I think you're okay with that for Wolfe, applying that pressure. But if fake out does come through onto the Kingdra, if you are Wolfe, a Flare Blitz into, or actually you don't have Flare Blitz, a knockoff into either of these slots could be a little bit more relevant, or even a parting shot to swap out into something that's going to be a little bit more useful. Kingdra is under a lot of pressure, so a protect here makes a lot of sense. You don't want to take a knockoff, you don't want to take a fake out, and Incineroar goes for fake out from Marco into that Kingdra. That is a pretty handshake agreement there. I think that makes the most sense. And now for Wolfe, we do see the Tailwind come through from the Jumpluff. What is Incineroar going to do here? Knockoff does come through, it does go into the Jumpluff, does about a third of its HP, and notably gets rid of that Covert Cloak. So in the future, Jumpluff will be prone to fake out. That could be pretty big, all things considered. Wolfe does also have that Gothitelle in the back that has access to fake out. So now, no priority moves available. Marco's Pokemon are going to be the faster of the two for the rest of this turn. Sleep Powder comes through onto the Kingdra again and does manage to hit. Kingdra once again taking a big fat nap right here and now. So Incineroar does go for knockoff from Marco. That is going to remove the safety goggles from Incineroar for Wolfe, meaning that it is prone to Sleep Powder again from Marco's Jumpluff. So far with that Kingdra staying asleep, we do get a parting shot from Wolfe's Incineroar, and we are going to get a swap out here. Gothitelle coming in would give Wolfe additional fake out pressure into the Porygon 2. However, that would make it pretty vulnerable to a potential knockoff from Marco's Incineroar, which would take off that Citrus Berry and do quite a bit of damage in the same process. And right now for Marco, Kingdra is asleep. As long as Kingdra doesn't wake up on this turn, you can just guarantee that you're going to get a lot of good work into the rest of Wolfe's team. Just keeping Kingdra permanently asleep should put Marco in a pretty good spot. Again, Marco's Incineroar is the faster of the two Incineroars. It has some decent damage. It's relatively bulky here. Gothitelle does go for fake out into Jumpluff, so it does not get to move on this turn. We do see parting shot come through for Marco right here. A very interesting side parting shot here. So what this does for Marco, parting shot into the Jumpluff, guarantees that even if Wolfe gets a protect with both Pokemon, that Incineroar manages to switch out. And notably on this turn, Marco gets to bring in Ursaluna without fear of knockoff. The only thing is, does Kingdra stay asleep? It does. A Muddy Water here could have been absolutely disastrous, but with Kingdra staying asleep, Ursaluna coming out onto the battlefield, this is the situation that Marco wanted in the previous game, which was Ursaluna on the battlefield with Guts triggered and still plenty of support to go around. Wolfe swapping out Incineroar on the previous turn gave Marco this exact opening. And again, that side parting shot was meant that Incineroar was guaranteed to be able to swap out without Ursaluna taking too much damage or too much pressure. So now for Marco, you have plenty of damage on the field. For Wolfe, this is a really hard position to navigate. You do still have Psychic from Gothitelle. You either need to swap Politoed in and hope and pray that Kingdra has enough damage with a Weather Ball to one-shot Ursaluna. But if Kingdra does not wake up, then that would do not very much for you. Politoed does come in. This is going to mean Kingdra doubles its speed in the rain. This should put it faster than the Ursaluna. It won't speed it up. I don't think it'll make it faster than the Jumpluff with Tailwind still up. But we would have to see. We do see the Terastallization coming through from Wolfe. Again, this is going to be as much damage as possible for Wolfe if Kingdra wakes up. If Kingdra does not wake up, this is all in on Wolfe. It's pretty clear that this is more than enough. And Marco seeing the read, the sunlight comes through. This is going to guarantee that even if Kingdra didn't go for the Weather Ball, but instead went for Muddy Water, that even that would mitigate the damage. Earthquake comes through and does a ton of work, but it is going to be Weather Ball from Wolfe, from this Kingdra, that's going to be resisted by the Ursaluna here. And even with it being resisted, Ursaluna goes down to 81 HP, but it does not do enough damage. This should be it for Wolfe. This Jumpluff is going to be able to continuously set Tailwind up, continuously set Sunny Day up. Even with this Tailwind petering out, Jumpluff is still going to be able to click Tailwind one more time. This is going to make Ursaluna incredibly fast. Another Earthquake here will take out both of Wolfe's Pokemon, and then Wolfe is only going to be able to bring in the Gothitelle and the Incineroar. You do have Fake Out pressure on both, but Marco can go for a Terastallization, get plenty of damage out, and this should be it. This is exactly what Marco was going for in game number 1. Wasn't quite able to get there due to a well-timed and well-called knockoff from Wolfe. We do see Kingdra swap on out. We could see, I imagine we're going to see both Gothitelle and Incineroar come in on this turn. At the very least, we do see Gothitelle make its way onto the battlefield. Politoed does swap out. Incineroar is going to come out one more time. Even so, with both these Pokemon on the field, this is going to be a -1 to Ursaluna's attack stat, but it is already doubled from Guts. It's going to be doing so much damage even through this. It's not even going to be funny. I wouldn't be surprised to see either of these Pokemon just get taken out outright on this turn. So Earthquake comes through. Jumpluff is immune as it's a flying type. Incineroar goes down to just 1 HP. Ursaluna is ticking down on its damage here. Gothitelle, though, does not go under its citrus, go under half HP down to Citrus Berry quite yet. We could see Marco go for a Sleep Powder here into either of these Pokemon. Notably, Ursaluna is a little bit under pressure here from Fake Out. So a pretty clear Terastallization, I think, if you are Marco. And if you're Wolfe, going for a Fake Out into both of these Pokemon, I think is just your best call. It gives you another turn of, trying to wear out Tailwind, and you have to try to get rid of this Jumpluff if you are Wolfe in order to set up the Rain effectively for Politoed. Fake Out does go into the Ursaluna here. It's going to be getting incredibly low. Sleep Powder does come through. Gothitelle does avoid the attack. Gothitelle did not go for Fake Out. Ursaluna flinches. Are we going to see a Psychic here from Wolfe? No, we're going to see Trick Room, notably. Okay, so Trick Room up. This is a potential way for Wolfe to get back into the game right now. Ursaluna down to 22 HP. Tailwind is still going to be up for at least another turn. Or actually, no, it looks like Tailwind has faded for Marco. So Ursaluna, not the fastest thing on the field. I'm interested to see what the speed tiers are now that Tailwind is down. We could still see... Oh man, are we going to see Wolfe swap? No, I don't think we're going to see Politoed swap in. I think if you're a Wolfe, you have to let one of your Pokemon at least go down here. But again, you do have the ability to try to take out this Jumpluff, I think, if you are Wolfe. Ursaluna is going to be getting incredibly low, but if you can take out Jumpluff and Marco has to swap into potentially Incineroar on the next turn here, we do see a Protect from Wolfe on his own instant. Is Gothitelle going to go for the Protect as well? Gothitelle is taking things rather well here. No, just one more Protect here. It's going to give Ursaluna another turn of Burn, which means on the next turn, it should go down basically no matter what to the burn damage. And that should, if Wolfe, again, assuming Wolfe gets hit by Earthquake, that will give Wolfe one safe switch in with either of his 2 remaining Pokemon in the back. So for Marco, it was pretty close to wrapped up, but Wolfe has made some smart plays. I think if you're Marco, you don't really have any other options but to keep clicking what you're clicking. If that Sleep Powder hit on Gothitelle, I think that would have wrapped things up just about completely. But again, that's the nature of Sleep Powder over Spore. Sleep Powder has a chance to miss. So Rage Powder comes through from the Jumpluff here. Again, a knockoff and a Psychic into that slot is going to do a decent amount of damage. You see the knockoff come through. Wow, a critical hit here is pretty big here. Jumpluff takes another Psychic as well. So at least both of Marco's Pokemon are going to be going down on this turn. Ursaluna will be getting some damage out here, assumedly. Earthquake does come through. At the bare minimum, Incineroar is going to fall. Gothitelle's Citrus Berry is going to proc, and this is going to give Wolfe the opportunity to bring in Kingdra and potentially, or actually, probably bring in Politoed, I would imagine, because then you still have the ability to click Perish Song if you are Wolfe. Ursaluna is going to fall here in a second. and that is going to leave Marco with Incineroar and one more Pokemon. So I'll be honest, I thought this was just about locked up for Marco, but a good Trick Room from Wolf, dodging that Sleep Powder, manages to do quite a lot of work, and now it's going to be Porygon 2 and Incineroar coming out onto the battlefield for Marco Silva. Politoed and Gothitelle both in the yellow, and I believe both of Marco's Pokemon here at full HP. This is still a tough matchup for Wolf, I think. With Trick Room on the battlefield, I don't know what Pokemon is the slowest between Porygon 2 and the rest. Marco does have Fake Out Pressure alive and well. Gothitelle cannot touch Incineroar, so again, for Marco, a potential win condition for the rest of this game is getting it down to Incineroar versus Gothitelle. Again, Fake Out is still very much a threat that Marco has that can apply to Wolf. A Fake Out into the Politoed as well as a Terra Blast could do a lot of damage, but that's pretty risky going into a potentially just a full protect from the Politoed. And so Marco could try to diversify a little bit here, Fake Out into the Politoed to guarantee that it doesn't move this turn, as well as to go for a Terra Blast in the Gothitelle to get some additional damage out. We could also see Marco potentially try to reverse Trick Room. I don't know, again, not knowing the speed tiers here makes things a little bit difficult. We do see the protect come out from the Gothitelle here. Are we going to see the same from Politoed? We do. Double protect from Wolf here. Make sure Fake Out is not going to be able to get too much out. It also gives Politoed another turn of leftovers recovery, which again is going to be pretty big in the long term here. But Porygon 2 does go for Trick Room. Now, this changes things around, but I don't know how much, and I don't know what the overall impact of Trick Room getting reversed is going to be. We could see Kingdra make its way onto the battlefield now. I think that's going to, it's now a little bit more of a threat. It does have the ability to Weather Ball a little bit more indiscriminately. Terra Stellar has already been used, so that does mean it's not going to be quite as effective to Weather Ball, but you do still have the ability to go for Muddy Water, since Weather Ball was a fire type move going into that turn. Actually, no, Weather Ball being a water type move should still actually get that. I actually don't know what the Weather Ball and Terra Stellar interaction is when it changes based on the weather. That's something to look into. Wolf, actually, I think this is Marco going for a Terrestrialization. No, this is Wolf going for, this is Marco going for a Terrestrialization here. He's the one with Incineroar on the battlefield going into that Terra Ghost. So it's going to be taking a little bit less damage from potential Weather Ball, and Knockoff does come through. Incineroar is the fastest thing on the field. Politoed goes down. Gothitelle now has some damage that it can try to put out right now. Terra Blast, though, comes through from the Porygon 2. Both of Marco's Pokemon are faster. Gothitelle down into the red, gets a Psychic off, but this is Eviolite Porygon 2. It's rather tanky, and we saw that before. It did not do very much damage. That is a special defense drop. That is not nothing going into Kingdra for Wolf. Porygon 2 getting weakened by that special defense drop is pretty big, but Kingdra is incredibly low. It maybe has a single turn of damage right here. It has to take out this Incineroar and get good damage onto Porygon 2 on this turn to try to give Gothitelle an opportunity to win this game. If Kingdra cannot get, I think for Wolf, you have to click Muddy Water here. Muddy Water, get a KO on Incineroar, but I don't know if that is going to be nearly enough damage. It is going to get boosted from Terra Stellar. It is going to get boosted from the Rain. It is going to get boosted from Stab. Muddy Water comes through. It does hit both Pokemon here. Is it going to do enough? No, both Pokemon just barely survive. Kingdra loses some HP. Incineroar is going to get to restore some of its health with its Citrus Berry here, up to 83 HP. Knockoff comes through. That's going to take out the Kingdra, and Terra Blast from Porygon 2 will take out the Gothitelle. Marco Silva taking game number 2 with some smart switch-ins and some smart pressure application on to Wolfe Glick. Terra Blast from the Porygon 2 into the Gothitelle takes it down from there. So Marco reversing that Trick Room locked things up. All right, so game number 3 for these players. I think if you are Wolf, bringing that Incineroar, it did not feel as flexible. It felt like since you have the slower Incineroar, you're not going to be able to apply as much Fake Out pressure. You don't have Flare Blitz. You're not going to have as much damage pressure outright. Knockoff is still useful. It does still get some work done, but you just don't have the same amount of aggression that Marco's Incineroar has. And additionally, continually getting hit by Sleep Powder from that jump bluff is incredibly frustrating. The way that Wolf can avoid that is by bringing in leading Incineroar, bringing in Politoed, and going Terra Grass right off the rip, but I don't know that Incineroar Politoed lead is particularly strong. If you're able to lead potentially Kingdra with Politoed, Kingdra swap Politoed in, Kingdra should be the fastest thing on the field. Even before Jump Off, even if Jump Off could set Sunny Day or could go for Sleep Powder or Tailwind, you could get some damage off then and there, but I don't know that it would be enough. If you are Marco, that game plan felt really good. I think you bring the same four. I think you try to approach it from the same way. And again, just try to find that place where you can safely bring in Ursaluna and get that Guts proc active on the same turn. So coming into game number 3, I'm interested to see if Marco is going to be able to get that revenge game. So are we going to see any changes? Wolfe does just lead with the Politoed and Kingdra, and Marco leads with Incineroar and Jumpluff. So the dangerous thing here for Wolfe to consider is that right now, Kingdra can get hit by Fake Out and can't do a gosh darn thing about it. Politoed is on the field, has set the rain. If you are Marco, this does force you to consider several options. Sunny Day would stop the rain, but it would not give you speed control. Sleep Powder would put Kingdra to sleep, but it would not do either. It would not get rid of the rain or give you speed control. Tailwind would give you speed control, but it would mean that Kingdra is still probably the fastest thing on the field and can do a lot of work on the next turn. I think if you are Wolfe, going for Protect here makes a lot of sense. Kingdra goes for the Protect here. Does the Politoed go for Protect as well? No, it does not. Incineroar goes for Fake Out into the Kingdra here, and for Marco, what did we see? We are going to see the Tailwind come through from the Jumpluff. So it is still raining, and Kingdra is still probably going to be the fastest thing on the battlefield, and Politoed goes for the Encore into Jumpluff. So Jumpluff is stuck doing Tailwind. It can no longer provide any of the other utility that it previously had. This forces Marco essentially to swap it out into whatever else he can. Now, Politoed and Kingdra are both on the field and can get some good damage out without any fear of the sun coming up. Kingdra doesn't have to terrestrialize right now, can just start going for Weather Balls, can just start going for Muddy Waters. Even a Draco Meteor potentially from this spot could do a lot of work. Politoed does have the option to go for Perish Song, but I don't think it is necessary here. It could instead just be going for Weather Balls. It could even go for an Encore potentially into the Incineroar right now if it wanted to. I don't know if that would be all that effective. We did see that Incineroar was faster even outside of Tailwind, and in Tailwind, it's not even going to be a question. So Marco does swap out the Jumpluff here, gets that Encore out of here. Porygon 2 makes its way on to the battlefield now. So I doubt we're going to see Trick Room get set up anytime soon, but Porygon 2 has plenty of other utility for Marco to bring to the table. We do see a Terastallization from Incineroar here into that Terra Ghost, taking away the water type weakness, but we saw that Kingdra can still do a ton of damage here, and a Weather Ball from this spot, I think I don't know if it'll KO, but it's going to do a lot of work here. Incineroar down to just 38 HP, does a ton into that instant. We see Citrus Berry get procced again, but what is this Politoed going to do? Weather Ball is still on the table. Parting Shot comes through from the Incineroar into the Kingdra, putting it down to -1 here. What is Incineroar going to swap into? Are we going to see the Jumpluff make its way back out onto the battlefield is the big question. Ursaluna could come in here. This would be a spot where it would take some super effective damage potentially, but no, Jumpluff makes its way out onto the battlefield. Now, if you are Marco, this is a terrifying spot to be in. This is how you lost the previous set, and you are here again. Wolfe is at a spot where he can swap, just take the Kingdra out, bring in Gothitelle, go Terra Grass on the Politoed, and you cannot swap out, and you cannot put the Politoed to sleep. Wolfe can Perish Song from that point, and right now, what it comes down to is Wolfe going to be able to get a swap out and get that Shadow Tag active before Marco gets the swaps? If Marco, now Marco has to be aware of this. This is an incredibly dangerous spot. If Marco stays in with both Pokemon here, this is almost guaranteed going to lock him in to experiencing the same exact thing that made him lose the prior set. We do see Wolfe withdraw the Kingdra. If Gothitelle makes his way back on the battlefield now, if you are Marco, you are absolutely terrified. No, it is going to be the Incin. And honestly, Marco, I don't know if you saw the player cam there. That was a sigh of relief. But Incineroar back out on the battlefield now. Fake Out is active. Porygon 2 swaps out. And again, this is a pretty decent spot for Ursaluna to come on to the battlefield. That is exactly what we see. We do see a Terastallization from Wolfe, though, for that Politoed here, wanting to avoid any potential sleep. This is both the Pokemon that can avoid Sleep Powder for Wolfe. It is the Politoed going into the Terra Grass and the Incineroar with the safety goggles both on the battlefield right now. Again, Parasong is not nothing. Sleep Powder comes through from Marco, and it does not affect the Politoed. Parasong comes out now without even Shadow Tag on the battlefield quite yet. Incineroar is here. We can see a swap potentially for Wolf into the Gothitelle on this turn. So Ursaluna and Jumpluff are both under pressure. Even with Gothitelle being off the field, this does force Marco to switch at some point in the next couple of turns and get out of what is, quite frankly, a pretty good position. Politoed cannot Encore right now. Jumpluff does still have Covert Cloak on it, so Encore onto the Jumpluff will not do quite as much on this turn. However, is Wolf going to swap into the Gothitelle? We do know that Gothitelle tanks Earthquakes and Headlong Rushes incredibly well, and that would, again, keep both the Marco's Pokemon stuck on the battlefield, especially since Ursaluna can no longer Terrastalize, since Incineroar went for that Terra. So Marco essentially losing out on one of his Pokemon being able to swap through, and does not make a swap here as Incineroar stays in and goes for the Fake Out. Sunny Day does come through from the Jumpluff here as Ursaluna flinches from the Fake Out. Weather Ball does come through from the Politoed here. It's not going to be super effective. It'll do a little bit of damage though. Actually, that's more than I was expecting. And after the burn, that's going to take Ursaluna down to just above half HP. So Wolf still not swapping out yet, and this is going to be a game of chicken. Is Marco going to anticipate a swap into the Gothitelle from Wolfe Glick yet, or is Wolf just going to stay in with these Pokemon and keep applying pressure? If you are Marco, you're going to have to switch out at some point. When is that going to be? This Ursaluna is your win condition. Incineroar in the back does a lot of work, but if Ursaluna cannot take this down, or cannot get considerable damage out onto multiple of Wolf's Pokemon, you're not going to be able to win this game, and Parasong puts you on a pretty tense clock. Again, we see Marco having to repeatedly consider what he is going to go for here. Notably, Incineroar cannot go for a Terra on this, or on either of these turns, so that does mean it's going to remain, it's going to have to still take facade damage, and it's going to remain weak to the ground type moves. We do see Marco swap out the Jumpluff here, bring Porygon 2 in. That's going to remove the Parasong from Jumpluff. Politoed does go for Protect on this turn here. Incineroar still on the battlefield here, goes for Protect as well. This is going to drop Perish counts down one turn lower. Ursaluna goes for a Facade, and with Porygon 2 still on the battlefield now, Trick Room is a viable option, and we've seen how much work that Terra Blast can do. Ursaluna down below half HP now. What is Wolf going for? Perish counts down to 1. If you are Wolf, you're going to have to, I imagine you're going to want to switch out at least one of these Pokemon here. I don't know if you're going to want to go for that sacrifice play again. Ursaluna still has some damage that it can put out here. It looks like Marco just does not want to swap out this Ursaluna yet. Wants to, instead is willing to sacrifice it here to try to get some additional damage out. But just Politoed and Incineroar just still have not taken very much damage. And we could see Wolf, we see Wolf swap out the Politoed. We could see Gothitelle come in here, and we could see Incineroar just go for Parting Shot potentially and bring the Politoed back in. That would also reset the rain as well, force Marco, who I'm assuming is bringing in the Jumpluff here, to have to try to set up the Sunny Day again. Earthquake does come through here. It's not going to affect Jumpluff. It's going to do a little bit to the Gothitelle. It's going to do quite a bit to the Incineroar. It actually takes it out all the way, and Gothitelle goes down below half HP. So Wolf losing the Incineroar here, but it's going to be a trade of the Incin for the Ursaluna, and it's going to mean that Wolf gets a safe switch in for the Politoed here, giving Gothitelle and Politoed pretty free access to the battlefield, meaning Parasong once again can be set up. So Ursaluna goes down. If you are Marco, I think you have to bring in Incineroar here in order to try to get that ghost type Pokemon on the field, that Pokemon that can use Parting Shot. Again, if you bring Porygon 2 out onto the battlefield, that puts you once again in that spot, in that incredibly vulnerable spot where Parasong just gets gets to KO 2 of your Pokemon essentially for free. Bring in Incineroar guarantees that at least on this turn, you do not get trapped completely by Parasong. But Wolf, knowing this, brings in the Kingdra. This is massive. So Kingdra on the battlefield now. Jumpluff there is no Tailwind setup. Jumpluff is going to have to risk going for a potential Sunny Day or a Tailwind. Incineroar does have the option to go for Fake Out outright into Kingdra, but Gothitelle can get some additional damage out onto either of these Pokemon. Jumpluff does have the option to try to go for Sleep Powder here onto either of these Pokemon. At the same time, I think Tailwind is the most important thing for Marco to try to get set up at this point. You need to try to outspeed this Kingdra, or at least make things close if the rain potentially gets set up. If you are Wolf, there's a world where you swap out the Gothitelle into Politoed. That does put the rain back up, but I'm not sure if you're as worried about that right now as you are potentially about trying to get an Encore onto the Jumpluff. Porygon 2 does come onto the battlefield now. Marco making the call that Wolf is going to try to play aggressive for the rest of the game, and that does seem to be the case. Jumpluff goes for the Tailwind here. That is going to make sure that it remains pretty speedy throughout the rest of the game, but Draco Meteor comes through into the Porygon 2. How much damage are we going to see? It goes down to half HP. Not nearly enough, and Kingdra's special attack drops harshly. Not going to be doing nearly as much damage in the remaining turns, and Gothitelle goes for Trick Room, but with Porygon 2 on the battlefield, Porygon 2 is going to be incredibly slow. I think it is faster than the Gothitelle, but it's going to be able to reverse Trick Room if Marco so chooses. That is an option now that Wolf has to be worried about. We could still see some good damage though from Marco. Ice Beam from this Porygon 2 is going to do good work into this Grass Terrad Politoed in the back, but the question becomes how much longer is Porygon 2 going to be able to survive? Notably with Trick Room up, Jumpluff is incredibly speedy, so it is going to be doing... It's not going to be doing very much here. It does take some good damage from the Psychic down below half HP. Kingdra does get to go for Weather Ball here. This is going to be super effective into the Jumpluff. Its own Sunny Day working against it. Jumpluff falls. Porygon 2 still on the battlefield here. It's going to be able to get, again, some good damage. This thing does still hit pretty hard for Marco. Ice Beam goes into the Kingdra. It's going to be neutral damage as it is a water type as well as a dragon type. But just as the sunlight fades, Incineroar is going to make its way back out of the battlefield. Wolf still has 3 Pokemon, very alive and very, very active. Fake out pressure for Marco here. Porygon 2 can still try to get some good damage out, but Gothitelle and Kingdra both can apply pressure, both can apply damage. This is an incredibly tough spot for Marco to try to navigate. It is so difficult trying to get KOs for Marco without this Ursaluna. Letting it go down to that Perish Song just feels like a concession to Wolf. And now navigating this endgame is incredibly, incredibly difficult. Incineroar does have the option to go for knockoff into Gothitelle here, but we know that Gothitelle is going to be faster under Trick Room. Both of Incineroar, we saw previously that Gothitelle is going to be able to get damage out. It takes damage incredibly well. Fake out is what Marco has to go for here. Gothitelle does flinch. We're going to see Kingdra go for Draco Meteor. It's already at -2, but Incineroar goes down to just 6 HP. It is just barely able to survive. Kingdra taking some additional chip damage. Ice Beam comes out. I don't know if this is going to quite be enough. Kingdra does fall, but honestly, for Marco, this means Politoed can safely come onto the battlefield now. Incineroar with that Terra Ghost is no longer a solid win condition into just a Gothitelle, and this Politoed is incredibly tanky. It's at full HP. Gothitelle is above half. Your Incineroar is in the red, and Porygon 2 is at half. This is incredibly difficult. Porygon 2, of course, can still go for an Ice Beam and a Politoed, but now that the rain is set up, you no longer have that Flare Blitz option from Incineroar that feels nearly as nice. That damage is going to be so mitigated. Gothitelle is going to be the primary damage source, or well, was the primary damage source for Wolf, and it's still going to be able to get some good damage out, especially off the bat, and it's going to take out Incineroar with absolute ease. Politoed now has a rain boosted Weather Ball to throw out at this Porygon 2, and I just don't think Porygon 2 has enough damage to deal with both of these threats. Weather Ball comes through from the Politoed here. It's going to go into Porygon 2. This should be more than enough damage over the course of a couple of turns. Yeah, it does more than half of Porygon 2's remaining HP. Recover does come through. Marco can try to stall this out, but I don't think it is going to be enough. Porygon 2 up to 134 HP. The Tailwind does fall here. I'm interested to see if this does impact the speed tiers all that much. I'm not sure it will. And right now, Porygon 2 can, I think the best it can hope for is these Stab Terra Blasts for these remaining few turns. You can try to go for Ice Beams, but at the end of the day, I don't know which one is more of a threat, the Gothitelle or the Politoed. So the question becomes, especially for the Recover minigame, are you going to be able to recover enough health and also dish out damage? Are Politoed and Gothitelle going to do over half of your HP turn over turn? Psychic comes through into the Porygon 2, does about 36 HP worth of damage. Politoed takes a little over a third of its HP as damage here. So what, we saw 34. A critical hit there is pretty big. I think that is going to all but lock it up. We do know that Porygon 2 is going to move first here. Actually, I think Trick Room fades on. Okay, so Trick Room goes back to normal. This puts Porygon 2 in just an impossible spot for the rest of this game. Politoed gets to go for that Weather Ball here, and Wolfe Glick in game number 3 takes things home and wins the Toronto Regional Championships. I don't know. I don't think that critical hit mattered all that much there, but I think the big thing in that game was Marco allowed the Ursaluna to go down to Perish Song. I think Marco was trying to play around Gothel potentially switching in, was trying to maneuver around that. The unfortunate thing was, with having already gone for the Terra Ghost on the Incineroar, you can't Terra Ghost the Ursaluna, you can't guarantee that you can swap out, and you're going to be taking super effective damage from any of the water type moves that Wolf has on the Politoed and the Kingdra. That makes things so much harder to navigate. So those two things going for the Terra Ghost on the Incineroar, I can understand why you would go for it, but it just makes things so much harder for your Ursaluna in the back, and then not trying to find an opportunity to swap out the Ursaluna, not trying to make that call to give yourself a safe play for the rest of the game. I think that is what ultimately leads to Marco losing that game number 3. I don't think it's necessarily incorrect to not swap out the Ursaluna, right? Like, if Gothel does come in, that Shadow Tag is incredibly pesky, but not making that call, I mean, it almost guarantees that you're not going to be able to win that game. But Wolfe Glick wins things, not, barely even using Parasong, it feels like, getting a couple KOs here and there, but being willing to just take one KO and then play aggressively with Kingdra to close things out, and Politoed taking that final KO. So congratulations to him. Apologies for this video coming up a few days late. Y'all had some personal issues. We are going to be starting to look at more recent Regulation H stuff. This very weekend, after I'm recording this, is when the first Regulation H tournaments of the 2026 season are going to be live and active. So starting next week, we're going to be covering those events. But until next time, y'all, be safe, be smart, make wise decisions, and farewell.